In August of 2015, he assumed his current role as CIO and as Deputy Commissioner. Before joining the SSA, he served in both technical and executive roles, sometimes facing engineering side, sometimes facing product side, sometimes facing end users, but always with both feet grounded in technology. In fact, he started out of college programming mainframe systems for the state of California, I understand. His prior stop before coming to Baltimore was in Silicon Valley, where he worked for both large software firms and startups. One of his startups, Green Plum, is now a leading company in the relational database and data warehouse markets after its acquisition by EMC and Teradata. He spent nearly 2 years based in Switzerland as the EMC/Green Plum CTO for EMEA. That must have been a nice posting. He's also worked in the consulting space for then EDS, now HP, as well as for what is now KPMG, and also for his own boutique consultancy. He also publishes a popular blog on database technology called the Database Fog Blog, which can be found at skylandtech.net. So please join me in welcoming Robert Klopp.
Thank you. All right, let's see if this works. I'm going to kind of start off, maybe chat with you guys a little bit and play futurist. And then we'll talk a little bit about some things that I'm going to talk more about the approach that we're taking to this Customer Connect stuff that Kate talked a little bit about when she was on a panel. So hopefully you'll benefit from the approach thinking. What I want you to do is imagine a curve that represents the ability of a federal agency to adopt technology, right? And the curve's not flat. We do okay. We're probably not, considered, federal agencies not normally considered to be, the most advanced technology adoption folks, but we do okay. And then imagine a second curve that's a little bit steeper. So because it's steeper, it ends at a higher point that represents the technology adoption curve of a Fortune 100 company. And, as a CIO, what people would ask of me is, gosh, it would be really cool if somehow you could accelerate technology adoption at SSA and catch up to where the best folks are in the Fortune 100. People would think that would be sort of a miraculous thing for a government CIO to be able to do. But I want you to imagine a third curve, which is the technology curve. And the technology curve goes way up above either of those two other curves. And the reason that that's important is because that's where the new companies, that's where Uber jumps, that's where Netflix jumps, that's where all of these guys jump to, because they don't have a legacy that they have to increment their way from. They just jump straight to where new technology is. And I think the reason I want you to think about this as we start talking about Customer Connect is, it's not clear to me that we can increment ourselves from where we are to the kind of customer engagement that we're going to need to get to. I mean, if you took 5 years on a journey to advance the way you connect with your customers, if you took 5 years to do that, imagine today we think Uber is the coolest thing around. In 5 years, Uber is passé. So what we have to do is not just think about business process and stuff like that. We have to think about the way technology is going to fundamentally change the way we connect with customers. And we need to start thinking about things that are very transformative. We have to jump probably onto the technology curve. We probably can't increment ourselves from where we are to where we need to be relevant to customers in 5 years when Uber is passé. So I want to use that as kind of a starting point for you all to think about. These customer journey mapping things are all kind of cool things, but the way we're going to interact with our customers in the future is going to be driven so much by the technology that's available to us to interact with them in different ways that you have to start thinking about something really fundamental and transformative. You have to probably start thinking about throwing everything out that you have and jumping right on that power curve, because I don't think you're going to get there otherwise. So that's probably the way I want you to keep that in mind as we start talking about some of this other customer stuff. I think that Kate already talked a little bit about the journey that we sort of talked about. So what I'm going to do is not so much talk about what we're doing at SSA, but what I want to do is talk about the way we started the business thinking about this. One day, feeling way more ambitious than I probably should have ever felt, I walked into the office and said, if I believe in my own mind that I'm going to have to do something transformative to get SSA to be where they need to be in 5 years, and I need to at least start people thinking about what would the world look like if we just started over. And so I walked in and said to a group of people, including Kate, I said, I want you guys to think about the problem in a completely different way. I want us to imagine how the agency should interact and engage with our customers 5 years from now in a world where you can't, in this discussion, you cannot argue for technology limitations because we're going to start all over again with new technology, and we're going to use the best technology that's available to us. You can't, and this is the second one, is the one that exploded people's heads right off their shoulder. You cannot argue for policy constraints because we have control over policy ourselves. We can't start thinking about the future from a starting point of policy, some of which in our case is 80 years old. And I said the third thing is you need to think about the way we engage customers from the way customers would like to be engaged, not think about it from the perspective of how Social Security would like to engage people. And so we came up with the concept of CRIS that Kate talked about, and we started engaging not with IT, right? I mean, I could have got 5 or 6 geeky people together and we could have come up with a fantastic vision for where technology might be in 5 years. What I really did is I said, let's go talk to the business and see if we can start getting a broad consensus in the agency, a broad consensus around something really transformational, because I knew if I didn't get a broad consensus, it didn't matter how cool the vision was. And we said, you think about this not from the perspective of the agency, think about it from the perspective of Chris. Think about what the world might look like in a world where Uber is passé. And I said, as an example, imagine a world where Chris is sitting in Facebook one day commiserating with her friends because his or her spouse just died, and we reach out to Chris on Facebook and say, Chris, we're really sorry for your loss. We believe that you are eligible for some benefits. Click OK and we'll deposit $3,046 a month in your account every month. We could build that today. There's no advanced technology. There's nothing fantastic about that. The technology exists to do that today, right? So now we're starting to cause people to think about what might the world look like if we took advantage of all of the things that we have to take advantage of in order to get this thing going. And it started people talking, and the conversations got more and more interesting. So the second thing we did is we came up with something that frankly, this was my attempt to try to get people to think about process reengineering without ever saying those words to them. So we came up with a framework, which is on the bottom here, which basically said, let's imagine really what goes on at a very fundamental level when we engage a customer. If what happens basically for us is there's some life event. Something happens to Chris, which is interesting to us. Maybe it's interesting because it's an event that causes us to want to capture some information about Chris. Or maybe it's interesting to us because it's an event that causes us to want to reconsider whether or not Chris is eligible for some benefits, right? And then once we've identified this event, let's ask ourselves, what are all of the different places that we might go to get information about that event? And I'm going to go through some examples in a minute about the kinds of things we thought about. So now we've collected all the information we need about the event or about Chris, and now we're going to, and that information comes at us through a series of channels that might be different than the kind of channels we think about today. For us today, a channel is Chris, go please log on to our website and spend 3 or 4 hours filling out a bunch of electronic forms that tells us all about your life. But maybe we're going to find data and collect it through different channels. Maybe Facebook becomes a channel. Maybe certainly Google knows an awful lot about every Chris in the room, right? The middle box is the one that I think that we sometimes miss when we just talk about customer processes and journeys and stuff like that. Because in the end, what we're going to do is make some decisions about how we want to engage Chris. In our case, that might be a decision about eligibility for a benefit. But there's lots of decisions that have to go on. And the way we make decisions is fundamentally changing because of technology. Today, the way we make decisions is we say, here is a giant blob of information about Chris, Mr. or Mrs. Social Security employee. Please browse through all of this stuff and see if you can figure out whether or not Chris is eligible for some benefit. And if they are, click this button yes or click this button no. It's not very far in the future. In fact, again, it's all technology available today, where we're more likely to take all of that information, feed it into some kind of a machine learning algorithm that maybe doesn't make the decision today, but it basically trolls through these 2,000 pages of information and comes back to the employee and says, we think that there's only 1 or 2 decisions that you could make given what we understand about Chris. We think that here are the 5 or 6 relevant facts that help you make the decision. There's another 2,000 facts that we eliminated as not being relevant to the decision. Now a human being with some empathy goes through these 5 or 6 facts and says, now I know and can very quickly make an extremely accurate decision. In other words, it's a human being augmented by machine learning. It's interesting, by the way, there's lots of buzz about these machine learning algorithms beating the world champion at Go or beating the world champion at chess. But if you actually start reading the literature on this stuff, the even more effective things that they're finding is that the best chess games in the world are done by human beings whose decisions are augmented by the computer. That there's still a human characteristic that is beyond machine learning to get its head. I guess they don't have heads, do they? But beyond machine learning to be able to understand the problem domain. So the best decisions are made by human beings augmented by a machine learning thing. It could also be that some of these decisions could be just done by a machine. So I think in the future, in this decision thing, what you're going to see is, we're already seeing machine learning being used to do very sophisticated medical diagnosis. And the problem, for example, of disability determination, which is based very much on medical evidence, is a much simpler problem to solve than diagnosis. So maybe we do get to the point where really sophisticated stuff is going to be driven by these sophisticated machine learning things. This stuff is here today. In 5 years, it's going to be embedded in the systems that we all start building if we just get our heads wrapped around it and start getting there. So I've now started on the left. I've identified life events. I've now found really interesting places to go get the information about Chris. Instead of making Chris sit down and key it all in, I can go figure out probably everything I need to know about Chris. Now I make a decision, and now there's also a really interesting new set of ways that I'm going to go communicate to Chris through channels out. And it's that whole combination of understanding the events that are interesting to me, collecting data, making decisions in a more intelligent way, and then communicating back out to Chris that becomes the new experience that Chris has with the federal agency. I think we all have got to start tracking on the way technology is going to change the way we engage with customers, where we're just going to, we're not like commercial industries. We won't go out of business because somebody jumps ahead of us on the curve, but we'll become ridiculous. Really, will become ridiculous. People will think Uber is ridiculous, and then we're going to put up a green screen, right? It's just not going to work. So I guess what I'm trying to do is let you see this framework that allowed us to go talk to the business about different channels and stuff like that. Now let me talk about some of the things that popped up when we went through this so you can see how this framework worked. All of a sudden we started saying, think completely out of the box about where might you find information that Chris just retired, and we may now want to go talk to Chris about retirement benefits. And people started saying really interesting things like, your car insurance company is going to know, because every car is going to be wired with some sort of a GPS thing, and the car insurance company is going to see that you're not driving to work on Mondays anymore, right? The car insurance companies are going to know, and they're going to want to know, because they may want to sell you a different insurance policy because now that you're retired than the kinds of insurance coverage and other products that they had before. So here's something, a completely different place to tell us about a life event that Chris just retired. Chris's bank is going to know that he retired because all of a sudden they're not going to get paychecks anymore, right, from the same employer. And start thinking about all of the people that have indications that Chris is retired, so you don't have to sit back as a federal agency and wait for Chris to come to us and say, gosh, I retired, am I eligible for some benefits? We could go detect these life events and proactively go reach out and engage our customers. And the information about, excuse me, the information about these life events is everywhere in the social network. It's spread everywhere. I guarantee you Google knows, right? Facebook knows, because the first thing you did is go post on Facebook, woohoo, right? I'm retired. So there's all of these new places that you could go see what's going on in our customers' lives and start to proactively reach out to them, so that instead of waiting for them to come to us, which is the models that we use today. And if you don't rethink about the fundamental capabilities to go get this information, you might not create a customer journey map that is proactive, because you don't think about the fact that you could just go get this stuff. When we started having these discussions, as you can imagine, there were lots of people going, oh my God, it's Big Brother, we can't do that. And we're just going, we're not collecting any information that we don't collect already. We're not suggesting we're going to collect more information about Chris. We're just saying, let's go get it proactively, instead of making Chris, as she's in the depths of despair because his or her spouse just died, we're not going to make her come into a field office, start telling us about the spouse's information to figure out what benefits they're eligible for, identify the fact that the spouse had a child that Chris didn't even know about, and make him go through all that kind of stuff. All these things that we deal with day in and day out in our field offices, we would know all of that information, because it's all available if you just think about the social network and the web and Equifax and Axiom and all of these people that know all of this stuff. They know so much stuff that's where the NSA goes to get the information, right? So it's all out there if we just go get it. We probably have to have an opt-in capability, which is what we see in all of these other Facebook-y things. So maybe when Chris signs up for an SSA account, we say, hey Chris, we could go save you the trouble of filling out all of this information if you just click here and opt in, and we'll go get it for you. If you click here, we'll get it for you and let you confirm it. If you're good and you think we're going to get it, then we're going to go get it and it'll be okay. But I think that this is where the customer engagement is going to go in the next 5 years. It's going to become very proactive. We're going to go reach out to people. We're not going to be asking Chris what she wants. We're going to be using all of this intelligence, all of this data that we collect proactively to anticipate what Chris wants, and to go reach out to Chris and say, we think that this is probably something that you would be interested in, and the fact is we're more likely than to be right? I mean, if you think about Google and these things, I mean, you can start to see that people are starting to anticipate what you want to do next, so that so that the information is popping up for you. They know that you're going to golf because you put it in your calendar, and they know you're probably interested in what the weather is, so they just tell you it's going to, maybe you ought to postpone your golf thing, it's going to rain. All of this is starting to happen now, right? So I think we have to think very differently about the way we engage customers. We have to be more proactive. And this framework, I think, is an interesting way to go start people thinking about it, because you can say, think about what it is that we need to know about Chris in order to get things going. Think about the kind of data that you need. Again, I don't think the data is different than the data we get today, right? Think about where we might go collect the information that is beyond what you've thought about today, and think about how we can make decisions using much more sophisticated technology, so that instead of going to Chris and saying, could you go get in a queue and we'll have a human being evaluate the stuff as soon as we can. And in our case, sometimes those queues are a year long. We're going to go try to make these decisions in an automated way to the best of our ability, maybe augmented with a human being, maybe not. That's kind of the gist of what I wanted to get through. Make you think about technology and the fact that it's going to really change the way things are going on. Make you think maybe about something transformative, not incremental, because I think that the technology curve is going to drive you to transformation and away from modernization into just jumping. In fact, I'll tell you, I actually just finished an article for CIO Review, because I think if you take this thing I'm talking about out not 5 years, but 10 years, what's going to happen is the technology adoption curve becomes so steep that you can't, even the best companies in the world will not be able to keep up, and we'll get to the point where we will transform, abandon everything, transform, and 5 or 6 years later, abandon that and transform again. We'll not be able to incrementally keep our systems up. So I want to challenge you to think about where we're going in a world where technology adoption continues to accelerate and accelerate, accelerate. I'm going to suggest that you think about a really fundamentally different way to engage your customers that's got to do with being very proactive, which means you have to proactively go get the data that we're all talking about, and you have to figure out how to make decisions in an automated way using some of the machine learning kinds of technology that are available. I think that that's really the world that we're starting to stare into. And it's going to fundamentally change the way we engage our customers. Time to think about it.
Maybe time for a couple questions.
Time for a couple questions.
So I like the idea about predictive analytics, and I think that's an important piece of the customer experience. But you mentioned, I think in one of your statements, that you're not going to ask the customer what they want. And I wonder, I know that the rate of technology is moving very quickly, but I often think about also a different demographic of audience, which are the technology adopters that are slower, maybe older generation, more seasoned generation, and how to reach them, and that making sure that we're not missing the information that we need to get to them as well, while we're thinking about these new strategies for customers.
So the question was, what about an audience of customers that may not be particularly technologically savvy? And as one of the more seasoned people in the room, I appreciate the fact that you changed from to the seasoned definition of elderly people. But so I'll tell you, it's actually even more, we've been thinking about this really seriously at Social Security, because a big part of our constituency is actually disabled and elderly. And so one of the things that we're trying to think about is how do we engage people that are disabled and old and don't have technology at hand. We're not making the assumption that everybody has an iPhone and stuff like that. And it's actually a really, really interesting problem. We also think technology gives us some really important capabilities to go deal with those folks. But probably the most interesting observation that came out of all of these discussions was that if we could automate big chunks of the process. The human beings that we have in the field offices, which is one of the absolutely fantastic assets that Social Security has, is people that are out there engaging with customers face-to-face, not through the website, that those people will now be free to spend more time listening to people, dealing with disabled, dealing with the elderly, and be ever more empathetic as opposed to the situation we put them in now, where we've just got to kind of rush people through. So I don't think I know for sure exactly how we use technology, but clearly things like voice activation and stuff like that is helpful. But I think the most important thing is that I think it's a really important thing to remember that you can't just bank on technology and assume that everybody that's a customer has got an iPhone and that's the way to get to it. You can't assume everybody's got an iWatch, although you want to talk about interesting new technologies that have to do with customers. I mean, by the way, you can imagine we've had a lot of fun in these sessions talking about how the future could be. So we had lots of discussions about what happens when Chris's iWatch detects that Chris is pregnant before Chris knows it. And in Facebook, we pop up and say something like, would you like to enumerate and get a Social Security number for your unborn child that you don't know you're having yet, right? So I mean, technology there is some fun stuff in this, but I do think that you could imagine that if I put an inexpensive iWatch on every disabled person, I would actually know something about their disability. We have a lot of problems with people that are temporarily disabled and then they become able again, and we are paying them benefits still. There's an activation monitor on your watch. Maybe I give everybody an iWatch, and now I have some idea about whether they're disabled or not. These are the kinds of things I think will happen in the near-term future. Other questions?
One short question.
One short question, sorry.
Hi, Robert. This is very inspiring, but I have a question with your team, as you're starting to think very broadly about what the future could be. Obviously, you need to keep the wheels on the bus, and work can't shut down at that point. So, what does your team look like? Do you have a team of innovators that are charging at this? Is this a part-time sort of project for them? In addition to, how do you manage the steady state of what is and the future state of what could be?
So the question is, how do I do this while I'm keeping the ship afloat? It is a small team of innovators, but it's starting to expand, and what we've found is there's more innovators in the agency than you would think, as long as you can give them a way to frame up their ideas and be creative about this stuff. We're just now starting to transition from a place where we've talked about how it could be into a harder problem, which is how would we actually engineer it, and not just engineer some specific thing, some specific solution, but how do we engineer it so that the places that we get data and the kind of data can change and expand? How do we change it so that we can add channels, and how do we change it so that the decisions that we have to make, we can actually just plug in new bits of stuff? So we're starting to move to a place where we're trying to imagine how we would actually build this stuff, and surprise. I mean, I think we actually are on something that's pretty cool in that regard. And now the next phase of this is to try to see if we could get our heads wrapped around what it might cost to actually go build it, and then go ask for funding to go do it. And clearly, if the answer comes back, it's $3 billion to go build it from scratch. It'll be more difficult to get funding than if it's $300 million, right? So I think the answer is that we're right now we're sort of in exploratory mode, and it's easy to maintain that mode with the production mode. It'll become much more challenging when we get to the point where we're going to try to build.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rob Klopp.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.